Hello to all participants and attendees, and thank you very much for joining us today from different parts of the world and for our final research activities in the framework of the project GLAM and Digital Soft Power in the Post-Pandemic Reality. It has been really a great journey for us so far in developing new methodologies and tools for GLAM institutions to better understand, evaluate, and even forecast the soft power. Mapping museum collections API and mapping digital audiences in collaborations with museum professionals, policymakers, and digital experts have been really instrumental to design a new data mapping prototype to explore various dimensions of institutional soft power. And we are very grateful for all the input from our international colleagues and community members for their valuable contributions. And I'm happy to invite you to our last demo session within the framework of this project. While in the previous sessions, we explored soft power mapping on macro level, tapping on the open source data collected from different global repositories. With this event, we would like to zoom in to explore local soft power impacts and investigate the feasibility of automatically aggregating and mapping data on urban level. Our Datathon today, forecasting local impacts of traveling exhibitions, aims to discuss challenges and opportunities of urban cultural infrastructure mapping, as well as its value and implications for designing touring exhibitions and predicting their local engagement power. The Datathon will include three important activities, two mapping panels and a discussion forum, each taking no longer than 30-40 minutes. We will open the session with an introduction of our keynote today, Paul Owens, the founder of the World Cities Culture Forum, and we will close the session by extending the conversation with touring exhibition experts from Europe and Asia Pacific. Before we start, I wanted to thank you all for coming today and invite you to use our Q&A function to submit your questions to our panelists and participants, and we will try to address them throughout the whole event. It's my great pleasure to share the floor now with our keynote, Paul Owens, founder of the World Cities Culture Forum. He is an internationally recognized cultural strategist and policy advisor who pioneered now well-established methods to measure the impact of cultural policy. Paul leads international work across Asia, MENA, and Latin America, and consulted for the European Commission and the UK Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sports, Inter-American Development Bank, and different municipal governments across countries. So Paul founded the World City Culture Forum in 2012 and worked with the Mayor of London's team to grow a network of more than 40 major cities as an important independent soft power city network worldwide. So you're very welcome, Paul, and the floor is yours now.
Okay, thank you very much, Natalia. Thank you for inviting me to this very interesting event. I'm going to keep my remarks really short at your request. And just to let everyone know, Natalia basically asked me to cover three things, so I'm just going to do three short sections. Tell you a little bit more about World Cities Culture Forum, what it is, who it involves, and why it exists. To basically answer the question about, to what extent is it a soft power network? How important is that soft power element in it? And then finally, just looking quickly at cultural infrastructure and data, and maybe a few thoughts on the future of that. We now consist of 40 cities around the world. The date 2012 is very significant because that's when we were launched, and that gives you a clue to the soft power nature of our network, because this project was actually launched as part of the Olympics in London. So it's a sort of promotional ploy, stroke soft power ploy by the Mayor of London. But the actual origins and the core of the project is a piece of work we started doing in 2008 with the Mayor of London, which was looking at what his economists called cultural competitiveness. So what they wanted us to do is they wanted us to look at London's kind of cultural capacity compared to other big world cities, and to sort of draw some conclusions about where it stood in the sort of global order. So what we did was we invented a kind of a 60 indicator framework. And it was actually quite, no one had ever done it quite that way before. You'll all be familiar with all these rankings of global cities, whether it's about power, quality of life, and quite often you'll see culture in there as an element, but they'll only be using 2 or 3 indicators. So my team kind of devised this framework of 60 indicators, and it sort of started with that piece of research. And then when the Olympics happened, the people in City Hall decided that they could use that as a way of sort of engaging with the cities and producing some kind of international network. So what we did is we went to 12 cities, because it was 2012, and we actually persuaded them. And this, I guess this probably goes to the fact that, you know, I work for a small consultancy and the team around me were actually quite good salespeople. We managed to persuade 8 of those cities actually to come on board and actually to pay to be part of the report. And so we launched our first report in 2012, and we tried to do a report every 3 years. But it's evolved a lot from that basic report. I'm just trying to see if I can get my screen to move. That seems to be able to. Yeah, so now it essentially, you've got a research and data platform sitting in the middle of it. And it's gone way beyond just doing the cultural infrastructure sort of index. We now do lots of policy work. We have themes around climate change, around workspace, to summits, and there's a leadership a sort of exchange program that's funded by Bloomberg Philanthropies and Google Arts and Culture. So it's really expanded way away from its original sort of data. But just to give you some idea in terms of the data indicators, this is how we've organized them recently. You'll see essentially it's all secondary data. It's all data that's kind of more or less publicly available, or if it's not publicly available, we work very closely with cities to draw it together. So we're not generating primary data at all. We're not pulling data in clever ways off sources. We're actually handcrafting the data with the cities. And I'm surprised I'm never asked any questions about this, because it's actually not really, I would say, a totally objective data exercise. It's more of a political and promotional exercise of the city telling a story about itself. So what happens is that we basically co-create this data with the cities. So that gives you some idea about our sort of activities overall. And then just quickly to move on to the question of, you know, the extent to its cultural diplomacy soft power exercise or set of exercises. I think we did a declaration in 2017, and I just think this gives you some idea of where the network sort of positions itself. And you can see here that this was written, you know, in 2017, the year after Trump was elected. You know, we've got 5 cities in our network from the USA. So this is very much a kind of like anti-populist manifesto, and it's trying to position WCCF, as indeed many other global city networks do, as a force for progress, on the side of progress as opposed to populism. So you can see that if I just picked out the second bullet point there from the Seoul Declaration, it's about, you know, making culture available to all citizens. But there's that very loaded sentence there, recognizing that world cities are workplaces, safe harbors and homes of outward-looking, open-minded citizens. That's very loaded. I'm sure you will agree. And this is just our latest summit. And one of the things we found, and I don't want to be too sort of flippant here, but what we found is that once we started engaging more cities across the world and getting deputy mayors and heads of culture, sometimes they bring their sort of data people along, sometimes not. But what they love doing most of all is they love getting together and talking about the policy dilemmas that face them. They don't actually like talking about data, and they're not, and quite a lot of them are not particularly fluent in data. And I think that's, again, part of the way it's kind of evolved into much more of a peer-to-peer network and a soft power network from being a data project, although the data project still remains at its core. These are just 3 examples of the policy work we do. Something around workspace for artists, that's a big theme. Culture and climate change have been doing that since we started. And one of the reasons we do that is because we've got a very close relationship with C40, which is another global network that came out of the Mayor of London's office much earlier, that focuses on climate change and environment. So they've influenced our thinking a lot. And we also do work around diversity, equity, and inclusion. This is an example of our learning and exchange, the leadership exchange network. There's the top group of people are people in that's Toronto, hosting a sort of week-long event with about 12 cities, looking very specifically at affordable space, the affordable space dilemma. And then on the bottom, that's Sydney and Toronto, looking very specifically at policies for supporting Indigenous cultural activity and Indigenous artists. That's just an example of how we frame the affordability cultural infrastructure question. So we've focused on cultural infrastructure around our data, and quite a lot of our cities now have cultural infrastructure plans, I think, as a result of working within the network. And one of the reasons we focus on cultural infrastructure, of course, is because it's relatively easy to map. It's relatively easy to kind of pick up. It's actually quite straightforward, and we're always surprised that when cities join our network and start working on this, they haven't done more of it. But it's one of the great things about the World Cities Culture Report is it brings all that together in one source, one sort of platform. So in terms of thinking about the future, I'm going to leave you with these two thoughts. I think in terms of sort of data and cultural policy for the future, I think there's kind of two directions that certainly I notice that we're going in. The first is, I think there is going to be much more dynamic and use of sort of open source data, and much more of an attempt to work across policymakers, arts organizations, civil society organizations, local regeneration. So it's going to be much more of a sort of partnership approach to pooling and working with data and using data as a sort of storytelling force for change and for sort of focused activity. In London, there's something called the London Nighttime Data Observatory, and you see that happening everywhere. In very particular parts of London, you'll get people who run nighttime businesses, the local authorities, the regeneration seeds, the GLAs, people that they'll come together and they'll sort of generate data sets to sort of advance their agenda. The other thing I think is that we're working on is we're working on a new project. This is my consultancy firm working on it, which is called Culture 500, and that's looking at 500 of the world's big cities. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to move away from having handcrafted data that's produced in a sort of soft power way by the cities or co-produced with us, to essentially having it as a sort of big open data source. And this is just a very quick example, just a very quick overview of where we are. We're just developing a prototype for this at the moment. The thing it's probably most similar to is the Cultural and Creative Industries Monitor that the European Union has, but I think it's obviously global, and I think what we're trying to do is much more about sort of sucking off big data sources. But that's still in the very kind of experimental phase. But my vision for this is that is that we sort of, just as the World Cities Culture Forum used data as a way to promote culture in urban policy, I want to do this on a much broader scale. And one of my little lines is, there's 234 UNESCO creative cities. There should be 2,340. I'll finish with that thought. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Paul, for this fascinating keynote address. And I have to share that I first came across the work of the World Cities Culture Forum back in 2017, when I started to develop the first pilot project for Museums of Power Map, and especially addressing a task of mapping local impacts of museum travel and exhibitions. I was challenged to develop a solid framework for understanding the local urban cultural infrastructure as the host environment for touring exhibition. And I was amazed to find out about the work that you have been doing in cultural infrastructure mapping with so much level of detail and care. And I was sad, though, not to be able to integrate this framework into my mapping solution, as this is only available for a limited number of cities, like we mentioned, 40. But I'm really excited right now to hear that your approach is to expand it beyond these 40 cities and include 500 cities as a first start. But in case there is much more work to do to develop this network further and integrate many more cities across countries. So thank you very much for this inspiring, introduction to the webinar. Let me now move on to our first mapping panel that is devoted to the measuring and forecasting local engagement power of the touring exhibition Wonderland of the Australian Centre for the Moving Image. And I must also admit that the mapping was completed back in 2019, where we predicted potential engagement impact of Wonderland in 17 different cities around the world. And in our conversation today, we will try to explore how accurate were these data-driven and machine learning forecasts and illuminate maybe new variables that help museums to make important decisions in sending abroad or hosting their exhibitions. So on the mapping panel today, we have Chris Harris, who is the Director of Exhibitions and Touring of Australian Centre for the Moving Image. And I would like to invite him to the floor right now. He will introduce us to the exhibition and share with us its touring history and future plans and projections for the future. So Chris, you're very welcome right now.
Thanks, Natalia, and hi, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me okay. I'm in a very echoey office. I'm just going to take you through a little bit of the background about ACMI, because some of you might not know a lot about ACMI, the Australian Centre for the Moving Image, and then the exhibition itself. Just to tell you about why we conceived of the exhibition and what our intentions were for it and what sort of exhibition it is, which might help you understand why it's a really great example to look at for this sort of project, and for us a sort of classic example of our brand extension and soft power. I guess we don't use that term very often. So the Australian Centre for the Moving Image is Australia's museum of screen culture based in Melbourne, Australia. Melbourne likes to think of itself as the cultural city of Melbourne. Of course, all of the cities in Australia are cultural cities, but it does have that claim. And we see ourselves as a very outward-looking global museum, but with a very strong Australian focus on everything we do. Our remit is film, television, video games, digital culture, and art, which is incredibly broad. So we have a lot that we try and cover. We did a major renewal project in 2019, 2020, which unfortunately came up against COVID, but we renewed all of our public spaces, our entire museum, and built an entirely new, what we call a centerpiece, or permanent exhibition called The Story of the Moving Image, which presents our particular version of the story of the moving image. It's not a narrative and it's not fully historical, it's quite idiosyncratic, and it places First Nations culture right at the centre of the moving image. So it takes the moving image history back 60,000 years to the time when the Indigenous people of Australia told stories around fire, used shadow, used smoke, etc. to start telling that story. That's really important for us. The renewal, one of the major parts of the renewal, and this comes into why Wonderland was important for us, was that we developed a tool called the Lens. And the Lens is a free cardboard disc with an NFT chip that every visitor to the museum gets. And you can use the Lens to collect everything in the museum, everything in the exhibitions. You can collect films that you've been to see. We have 2 cinemas. And eventually, all of the things that we ingest, if you like, into our collections or temporary exhibitions will be collectible through the Lens. So the Lens currently has already allowed our visitors post-COVID to collect about 3 million objects. Obviously, we don't have 3 million objects. That means many objects have been collected many times. People can collect the objects, take them home, enter a unique code, go and look at what they've connected on a website that's their own space, and look at how we've curated those objects into a world of the moving image, the universe of the moving image, if you like. And to do that, we built our own operating system, what we call the XOS, or museum operating system, which allows us to link all of our collection data with all of our signage, all of our moving image, all of our presentation, so that ultimately any object that comes into our collection has an output with a digital sign and people can collect that object. It's sort of complex, but that's the basic idea. So Wonderland was developed before that renewal as a touring exhibition, because the other thing that we do at the museum is run a major international and national touring program. At that time, we had 3 international touring exhibitions in the market and 4 or 5 national touring exhibitions around Australia. Wonderland was really developed as a sort of flagship exhibition to represent the new ACME and a new way of doing things and the new brand. And it was a sort of culmination of all the things that we'd done in our 15, 16-year history up to that time, because we're a relatively young organisation. But it had a very theatrical outlook. It was very experiential. It was very digital. It was also very analogue. It was historical, and it was about creativity. It combined all those things in what we thought was a representation of all the things that we were about, and we set it out into the world, or that was our intention at the time, as a sort of representation of the new ACME. It's an exhibition about creativity, so it's about Alice as a vehicle for creatives across 100 years of cinema to have made their own version of that story, and how they've sort of treated that story and taken it as a vehicle for their own experiments in storytelling and creativity. So there's been, I think, 76 versions of Alice on film and television, not including all the little tiny versions. And she as a brand, and she as a powerful young woman, is a really interesting subject matter to explore story making itself. I'm just going to flick through some photos to show you what sort of exhibition it was. It was, highly theatrical in some senses. It was all about exploring. It was about empowerment. It was really about the fact that you'd be rewarded for exploring. So as part of that, we had a lot of sort of mystery, looking through doors, looking behind things, opening drawers and so on. As part of that experience, we developed a map. There's the map. The map came in 4 versions. One each for different demographics. So one for children, one that was slightly more risque for adults, 2 that were sort of family or a bit intermediate. One was a white rabbit, one was a red queen, etc. Each took you on a tour through the exhibition and allowed you to discover different things and unlock different things in the exhibition. So it was the map, which was sort of like a treasure hunt, but it also had an NFC chip in it. So it was a forerunner of the lens itself, and it allowed you to actually touch on things that you found, symbols that you found in the exhibition. And it would, for instance, play a little video in a secret spot for you. The exhibition was pitched at all ages. So from the very young, there was a map, as you can see, for the very young, and some for the young at heart. It was also very analog, so you could there was a lot of experiences, digital experiences, that combined the analog. So this is an experience called Painting the Roses Red, which is about building a soldier to put in the Red Queen's garden, but actually what you do is digitize your head, and the experience photographs the soldier you've made on the back of your map, which is through scissors and glue, and then combines them into a big projected experience, and you can collect it. I'm sure I'm running over time now. It also had big digital experiences, like this is a digital tea party, which was a video mapped experience of a sort of making of history of the tea party as a creative act. We collected a lot of data. So the lens itself that I mentioned before and the map itself allowed us to collect data. It allowed us to map people's journeys through the exhibition because they touched on to points throughout the exhibition. The lens does that to a greater degree. It allows us to map the most popular exhibits in the exhibition because we can tell which ones have been collected the most. And then when people log on afterwards and they look at the things they've collected, we can see both the way they look at those things, but also the way they link out into the world from that website and where it takes them. So if we find that a lot of people end up following a link to, say, Netflix to watch a certain video, we'd actually know that. And then we can use that data to actually send targeted emails to them, giving them information about our other programs. This is the sort of data we collect on the exhibition, and we use this to sell the exhibition around the world. So for us, it is a calling card. It is a piece of sort of soft power. We get funding from the government, which goes into the production of the exhibition in Melbourne, which it's intended to bring interstate and international tourists to Melbourne. But for us, we leverage that, and it allows us to create a really spectacular exhibition that can go out into the world. It went to Singapore and did a really successful season there. It went to the National Museum in New Zealand and had a great season there. As you can see from some of this data here, 172,000 people visited it in Wonderland. We can break those numbers down into lots of other different categories and stats, of course, like every other museum. But the map and the lens allows us to have a whole nother layer of data which we can use to sell the exhibition to those venues. And just in terms of Natalia's project and working with her early on, one of the really interesting things that the project did for us, and her students did a project that we found really fascinating, which was mapping Alice's reach into some of those cities around the world where Alice had a presence, either through other cultural activity like ballet and plays or films and so on that have been made in those cities, even commercial activities like shops that were dedicated to Alice and so on. That was really useful, and that told us where Alice had actually had a cultural reach in some of those cities, and it surprised us. Some were really obvious. She's really big in Japan, but it also told us she was big in Korea, not so much in some of the rest of Southeast Asia. Some European countries were, more into Alice than others, and that was really fascinating. I'm sure I'm over time. I'll stop sharing. That was the project, and it was a really fascinating project for Natalia's team to have a look at in terms of its global reach as an international touring product.
Thank you so much, Chris, for such a detailed introduction of the exhibition. I just wanted to go for it again. Unfortunately, it's not available anywhere. I remember I went several times when it was in Melbourne, and I loved it. So absolutely, I would recommend anybody to join if they travel to your city. So let me now step back and explain the mapping framework that we use to predict the local soft power of Wonderland in different cities across countries. The forecast system we built was based on their data first collected and analyzed by simply mapping all other ACME traveling exhibitions around the world. Like Chris mentioned, since 2012, ACME 2 exhibitions, Game Masters and DreamWorks Animations, and have been hosted by 16 museums in a dozen of different countries around the globe. And the layer we first developed draws on a large amount of data describing local context of hosting cities and museums. So urban context data includes multiple variables that reflect the level of city global exposure and cultural infrastructure correlated with the total urban population, literacy, migration, tourist visitation rates. And museum context data shows quantitative characteristics of a hosting institution, demonstrating its international visibility and online representation and power. The attraction power data mostly consists of the statistics on the visitors to this exhibition during their hosting period. So in May 2019, the Museums of Power Map application launched a new layer, and this local engagement power forecast layer predicted the soft power of this exhibition, and they're actually mapped it across 17 different cities that you can see on the screen right now, with Los Angeles on the top, and Tianjin in China is the less favorable environment for Wonderland to travel to. too. So beyond the urban and museum context variables, this layer also draws on online engagement power and cultural relevance indices, adding more factors to predict the local attraction power. And for example, cultural context is highlighted on the map with the intensity of the purple color, and the color coding helps to reveal those countries which supplied media items and exhibition objects for the developing of the Wonderland, because Wonderland, the list of objects actually contained a lot of different things coming from different parts of the world. And the more intense the purple on the map, the greater the number of those objects coming from this particular geographical area. We also added, like Chris already mentioned, cultural appeal variable based on cultural analysis of the urban context, exploring cultural references to Alice in Wonderland in the city environment. And specifically, we looked at the following 3 types of cultural references: tourism and leisure, which refer to different facilities such as cafes, restaurants, theme parks, hotels. Merchandise basically is about fashion, clothing, consumer goods available in the city, basically in the country, because all the cities are in different countries. And finally, we collected information on the local events and arts, exploring relevant events in the past few years, including ballet, opera, performance, festivals, any kind of activities. And as a result, we quantified the existing data, revealing the following results. As we can see here, London and LA are leading cities in terms of the urban cultural environment that creates multiple correlations with Alice. But also look at this Tokyo. Tokyo tops, the list with the tourism, leisure, and infrastructure. So as you can see also on this screen, there is a lot of examples that we were able to find in Tokyo of theme parks, hotels, restaurants, bars, all with specific, and explicit references to Alice. And it's really interesting and amazing, especially because Alice comes from the Western world, and, we were amazed to see that this is happening in Asia. So the local engagement power forecast is based on the prediction model of linear regression that combines a specific set of numeric input values to predict outputs. And it employs supervised machine learning algorithm, other subset of artificial intelligence. It builds basically on the mathematical model of a set of data that contains both the inputs and forecasted outputs that consist of training examples are refined and upgraded each time when the actual outputs are received. So in this way, the machine learning algorithm trains a model that dynamically processes new available data to make more accurate predictions. And like I said, with ACME, we had a lot of data collected from 16 different hosting environments and museums of the previous 2 exhibitions traveling. So, for example, among 17 potential cities where Wonderland might travel, the prediction model of linear regression forecasted Singapore and Wellington to be among the leading receiving cities in Asia Pacific. As the forecast model predicted, in total, Te Papa Museum, and it's actually happened already, generated 2.5 times lower visitation in 13 weeks than Art Science Museum did during 24 weeks of hosting the exhibition. In fact, Te Papa Museum, located in a city with a population of less than 500,000 people, invited up to 67% of the Art Science Museum's daily visitors in Singapore. So, and it's Singapore, as you know, it's a megapolis with more than 5 million residents. Despite its small urban context, Te Papa Museum in Wellington outperforms Art Science Museum in its global visibility and popularity, as evidenced in the museum context indices. And Te Papa annual online visitations and social media followers are several times larger than Art Science Museum digital audiences. So most importantly, due to geographic and cultural proximity, ACME has established more durable and stronger connections with cultural institutions in Wellington and has a much higher popularity among New Zealander audiences, as the global connectivity power index projects demonstrates. Also, the collection appeal power is higher in New Zealand than in Singapore, and 2 previous exhibitions sent to Wellington, Game Masters and DreamWorks Animations, achieved a very high local engagement impact, ranked at 89 and 100 respectively. So now let me invite Samuele De Stefani. He's the head of Audience Insight at the Papa Museum, and he will share the results of hosting Wonderland at the museum from December 2019 until March 2020. And I hope he will share some interesting details about the audience engagement on site. So Samuele, you are very welcome.
Kia ora, Natalia. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for the introduction. It was very interesting to listen to your models. Okay, so today I will just very briefly share with you some of the insights from the audience research that we conducted in Wonderland, in the exhibition space at the time. As you said, Wonderland was on show here at Te Papa between December 2019 and March 2020. So for us, it was the last international exhibition that we had before COVID. So with international visitors, as you said, Wellington is a small city, but Te Papa is a huge tourist attraction for New Zealanders and international visitors alike. So visitation at the museum is pretty high. Before COVID, our visitation was around 1.4, 1.5 million visits a year. So our visitation is pretty high, regardless the dimension of the city. At Te Papa, we pay particular attention to evaluate the impact of exhibition and programs, and this is because our ambition is to use feedback and data from our visitors to better understand them, to better understand our visitors. We want to learn more about their motivations, their needs, as well as their satisfaction and learning. For this reason, in the last few years, we've been focusing more and more on qualitative research, in particular on the qualitative dimension of our research. Our purpose is to move beyond number and statistics. Of course, we know that number and statistics are very important, but we also know that they only tell part of the story. Our research approach usually employs surveys to gather information from visitors. We have a team of research assistants that are on the floor 7 days a week at different times, and they randomly recruit participants as they are exiting the exhibition. These surveys that are filled in through iPads usually take 5 to 8 minutes to be completed, and in Wonderland we collected 568 responses in total. At Te Papa, we measure the success of our programs against the audience impact model, which is a tool that we developed and we use to set goals at different levels. We are particularly interested in understanding attention, reaction, connection, learning, and action. So in terms of reach and attention, Wonderland performed in line with forecasts and expectations. We had almost 74,000 tickets sold for the show between December and March against a forecast of around 70,000 tickets. Visitation was largely domestic. 57% of total visitors were from Wellington city and region. 28% were from rest of New Zealand, and just 15% of the total was made of visitors from overseas. This is not uncommon for us. Our ticketed exhibition are usually more likely to be for our domestic market. Interestingly, visitors in Wonderland were mostly young. Half of the survey sample was aged between 15 and 34 years old, but Wonderland was also a big experience for families. 38% of visitors came to the museum with children, and in particular, children in school-age children. Satisfaction and advocacy were pretty high. 52% of the sample were promoters, so they were extremely likely to recommend the experience to friends and family. Our survey data show that satisfaction was mostly driven by fascination and it was probably a result of all the interactives that we have seen in the presentation before. Another section is about connection. That for us was a bit difficult to measure in Wonderland. We were expecting visitors to connect mostly with the story and the character of Alice, but this didn't really emerge from our visitor comments. Learning instead was big. 58% of survey respondents said that they learned something new. Learning was mostly about simple facts about Alice and the numerous adaptation of the characters over the years and across media. Some comments also show deeper forms of learning, what we call the applied personal insight. This form of learning was very important because it might at times lead to action. In the case of Wonderland, most comments show that people left the exhibition willing to watch one of the movies or to read again Carol's book. So just to sum up a little bit, some of the key learnings that we had from Wonderland, we had almost 74,000 visitors. Visitation was in line with forecasts. Satisfaction and advocacy were very good. Visitors love the interactive nature of the exhibition, and in particular, the digital and the hands-on interactives, the tea party in particular. Visitors felt a very strong sense of fascination that really emerged. The exhibition was engaging in the imagination, and it delivered wonder and enjoyment to our visitors. In terms of impact, Wonderland achieved its targets of simple learning, but a deeper depth of impact doesn't strongly emerge from the research. Thank you. That was us.
Thank you so much, Samuel. I'm always impressed with the level of detail of all the data that you collect on your audience at the Papa Museum. There was another speaker in our last Datathon who also showed amazing project about your audience research. So thank you for sharing this with us today. So it's time now to share the floor with our experts from Germany, from Berlin and Frankfurt. So though Wonderland didn't actually travel to these cities, I challenged both of their experts that come from two different museums with some provocations of our forecast mapping. So in comparison between two cities, the Wonderland could potentially generate more impact in Berlin based on the following input data comparison. First, rather than in Frankfurt. So first, ACME established many more relationships and connections with different institutions in Berlin rather than in Frankfurt, and collaborated with Deutsche Kinemathek, actually 10 times more than with Film Museum in Frankfurt. Also, Berlin outperforms Frankfurt in urban context index due to its larger and more extensive global exposure and more developed cultural infrastructure. Also, Deutsche Kinemathek generates larger global audiences. So in terms of Alice cultural references, Berlin seems to offer a much more favorable environment for inviting such an exhibition because it has higher metrics for Alice representations in city relevant events and activities. But however, both cities provide also quite favorable cultural infrastructure relevant to the topic of the exhibitions in terms of tourism and other leisure activities available. So I would like to invite to the floor now Tim Heptner. He is a museum and exhibition project manager from Deutsche Filminstitut in Frankfurt. And yes, please, the floor is yours now.
So yeah, good morning, Natalia. Good morning to the panel. I hope you can hear me.
Yep.
Excellent. So thank you so much. I will briefly speak about the institutional background here of the DFF Film Museum and Film Institute in Frankfurt and share some experience from our most successful touring exhibition to date, which is the Stanley Kubrick exhibition, a monographic exhibition on the American filmmaker Stanley Kubrick. And I will end with some considerations, remarks, or thoughts about your model and its value for decision-making in touring or hosting exhibition processes. So let me share my screen with you. Okay, so I work as a touring manager for the DFF, Deutsches Filminstitut and Filmmuseum. We are located at the museum strand in Frankfurt am Main. So some insights or images of the house facade. Our mission statement, I'll briefly read it to you. The DFF, Deutsches Filminstitut and Filmmuseum, is a leading and forward-thinking international film heritage organization. We are based in the diverse and dynamic city of Frankfurt in Germany, and we actively work toward intercultural understanding and making connections to institutions in the film arts and sciences around the world. Some remarks on the touring exhibition background. Since its opening in 1984, our institution shares its collectibles, its film and exhibition programs with fellow institutions. To a small extent, the DFF museum program also contains touring and hosting exhibitions. Since the turn of the millennium, touring and hosting exhibitions is a rather recent development, and it's become more popular since the turn of the millennium. As the partner institutions of DFF, we have a traditional network of fellow film museums and film archives, mainly in Germany and the German-speaking countries. But as I said, more recently, we also find moving image institutions, heritage institutions with related programmatic interest, contemporary history museums, and exhibition halls with an interest in film and popular culture. So now let me quickly turn to a case study. Since 2004, DFF is touring its special exhibition on the filmmaker Stanley Kubrick, and it's by far the most successful special exhibition of our institution to date. It is probably also the most widely traveled and presented exhibition about a single filmmaker, maybe a single artist ever. Stanley Kubrick, we find him as artist and his works as a very strong brand, which is located at the intersection of art and entertainment industry. So it turned out to be very attractive for many museums who have a different program and collection focus. Next page shows some images, posters from venues who have hosted this exhibition in the past years. And the next two pages show a table that lists the year, the cities, the venues, and the visitor results we have seen so far. So from 2004 till 2014, 11 institutions, mainly in Europe, but also intercontinental. We have the Americas, North America, South America. It continues in the last 8 years. Another 11 venues showed this exhibition. Now we also find venues in Asia, again, North America, again, Central America, and Europe again. So this makes a total of 22 presentations of this exhibition on a global scale to date, with a total visitor of more than 1.8 million and an average per venue of 83,000. Yeah, I have a few images to share, just insights into how the presentation looks differently at different venues. Good. I'll continue with some considerations. So I'm really leaving the big data and statistical and numeric approach, just referencing some experience we made. So we have some questions that we typically would ask. Is there an appropriate institutional interest, a mandate, and a history in the partner museums? Can we see personal interest from curators, from the museum managers, and the stakeholders? Have we worked with the institution before? Then how strong is the institution in terms of its location, its market outreach, its reputation, and its attraction for its audiences and its media presence? So these are questions that I think your data certainly helps to answer. Does the institution have sufficient experience in hosting a touring exhibition? How's the visitor potential and expectation? Is there a reasonable project and marketing budget? And I think now we are entering a field that is more difficult to answer with data. I mean, data in the public. Can we receive facility reports? Are there guarantees for museum standards? How will the visibility of the venue be in the overall tour history? And can we, or do we expect that the venue and the presentation will foster and stimulate further interest. Very few conclusions. So we have really spoken to many institutions and individuals about performing or promoting this exhibition. But very often there are basic requirements and resources in terms of time, space, and budgets not met. So that's, I mean, after initial exchange of ideas, the communication stops. Communication and cooperation will be successful when the institutions are economically and curatorial efficient, when they have a strong outreach and can bear a certain risk. So we, in all the 22 presentations, the exhibition has been successful, but to a more or less extent, of course. There have also been rare exemptions where the exhibition has not met the expectations that the hosting venues have had. So for us as institution, this project has really allowed us to network with institutions in the whole world. But of course, this does not mean that we automatically see follow-up projects being generated. 1 minute about your model calculation. So I'm assuming, or I'm taking a more, I would say, I'm very curious to learn more about the model and its modes of application and its future ways that how it can be applicated in museum and soft power context. But I'm also skeptical. I think that the indices really help to recognize and visualize certain strengths and weaknesses of hosting environments. The figures are believable, yes, no. I would say that in our particular case, for instance, the urban context rankings of Frankfurt and Berlin, they look really fine. And the rankings in general aren't unrealistic or unreasonable. But I would not dare to say that Wonderland will sure do better in Berlin than in Frankfurt because the model says so. And I would not make according decisions on the basis of the model yet. Because I think that complex curatorial and institutional interests and decision-making dynamics are difficult to factor in your model. I would also say that a realistic model would have to refer to a specific institution and not use the city's name as a substitute. I think that the data maybe yet cannot reflect enough upon the specific cultural and creative capital which is inherent in exhibitions, and it cannot reflect on the project's particularities and upon the various regulated markets in which cultural institutions operate. So I think it is a bit too simplistic in this moment. For now, for this moment, I think that person-to-person meetings and qualified research and interviews will generate a much deeper understanding of the prospects of touring and hosting exhibitions in particular places. Even with more layers of data, the model will not be able to reflect upon project chances with intuition and real life experience. Obviously, I mean, it's a different category, it's a different way to approach reality. So final conclusion, while such models can add useful context info for decision makers, I do not think that museums will give away much of their touring businesses to big data algorithms very soon. That's it for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That is incredibly helpful and useful, all the insight that you shared in terms of how useful or not useful the model could be and what other variables actually play a big role in, in decision-making process currently. And it just challenges a lot in terms of how this data could be possibly mapped or quantified and added to the model. Thank you for sharing these insights. And now let me give the floor to Vera Thomas, exhibition coordinator at the Deutsche Kinemathek in Berlin, who will continue the conversation and will share the perspectives from the Deutsche Kinemathek. And please, the floor is yours right now.
Thank you, Natalia, and thank you for inviting me. So it was very interesting for me to study the model and to look at the data for Berlin. So yes, you've seen that in terms of the local engagement power forecast, that Berlin ranks first together with Paris among the non-native English-speaking cities in Europe with an index of 52, which suggests a stable potential for the Wonderland exhibition in Berlin. I will later on tell you a bit more about the Kinemathek's audience in particular. But now for what would happen if Wonderland traveled to the Deutsche Kinemathek? And this is like Tim pointed out, it's the point where we have to go beyond the map data the point where we have to deal with the nature of one specific institution. To implement an exhibition of this size is a challenge in terms of manpower, logistics, and finances. These three factors definitely play a role in our decision process to host an exhibition. As far as the exhibition space of the Deutsche Kinemathek is concerned, we have 4 galleries on 3 floors with a total of 750 square meters, which are regularly used for temporary exhibitions. And our permanent exhibition on the subject of film is housed on 1,000 square meters and spreads over 2 floors. So one question would be whether a show the size of the Wonderland exhibit could be accommodated in our special exhibition galleries, or if it would need to be adapted or condensed. The Kinemathek actually has more experience in sending exhibitions on the road than in hosting exhibitions of other institutions. In the last 22 years since our museum has opened, we have curated 66 special exhibitions and have only hosted 6 exhibitions from other institutions. And with our special exhibitions, we had 60 stops at other locations, national and international. And we do have a focus on exhibitions linked to our collections. So right at the moment, we are preparing a show on the occasion of the director Werner Herzog's 80th birthday. It draws from the director's collection given to our archive, and it will open in August. Furthermore, there's a focus on exhibitions that we have curated from our network and connections to filmmakers and similar institutions. The most successful traveling exhibition so far has been Martin Scorsese. It resulted from contact during a previous project and was the first exhibit to make the filmmaker's private collection publicly accessible. It has been touring for several years, and it was also shown at the Acme in Melbourne, among others. Now back again to Wonderland and the predictions. As I said before, I think that the exhibition has a great potential to reach people in Berlin. Berlin has a high affinity for film, tech, and innovations. And in particular, the idea of the exhibition to convey something about storytelling and the moving image is very attractive for the Deutsche Kinemathek as a museum for film and television. The thematic orientation of an exhibition is therefore also of great importance to us when making a decision. As well as the target group. So Wonderland, I guess so, it would also fit our strategy to target young audiences, families, and children. The visitors to our museum, they reflect a high level of internationality. The visitor numbers from 2017 to today, they show that 55% of our visitors come from abroad. This only in the pandemic year in 2021, this value was 44%. A large group comes from France, followed by the United States, Russia, UK, Spain, and Italy. For us, it will be very interesting to follow your project and to see how different traveling exhibitions perform in different locations and how maybe the museum's resources could also be taken into account. So thanks.
Thank you so much, Vera. Thank you for your favorable feedback on the model. And I can see in the chat already some conversations emerging about discussing different factors that really play a role in decision-making process. Yes, a lot of things depend on institutional connections, if there are connections in place already. And of course, the institutional profile, the museum profile plays a big role. Right now, my model, it targets the museum context by only quantifying the visitation and digital engagement of that museum, its capacity, how many it can, target online and on site. But we can see with the example of presented by Samuel, the Papa Museum, it's very, very interesting that the Wellington city is, the population is around 300,000 people. It's very small, but like he mentioned, it annually attracts more than 1 million visitors to the museum. So the museum itself has its own soft power that it should be taken into consideration. So thank you everybody here. Now let's move forward in our Datathon and continue the discussion that now will evolve around mapping the Superbugs exhibition developed by the Science Museum Group in London and its tour around the world in different countries, Argentina, China, Russia, India, and it even traveled during the pandemic crisis, which I think is really unique and fascinating. And on the panel, we have today Helen Jones, Director of Global Engagement and Strategy from the Science Museum Group, and her colleagues from Argentina and India will join her later. But right now, I give the floor to her to present us the Superbugs exhibition. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, so thank you very much, Natalia, and hello everyone. It's absolutely great to be with you and to have the opportunity to share with you a project that we in the Science Museum Group are really proud of, and that's Superbugs, the fight for our lives. So I'm speaking on behalf of the Science Museum Group, which is the UK's National Museum of Science and Industry. So as well as the Science Museum in London, our flagship, we have 4 museums in the north of England. And my job today is to briefly introduce the project and what it meant for us before Natalia demonstrates how she used our data in the mapping tool. And as she said, some of our partners will share their experience. Right, so here are some of the numbers, which we think are pretty impressive. These numbers took place over a period of around 2 years. They exclude the London showing, which would have boosted the numbers a lot more and included the pandemic lockdown. So what's the story here? So Superbugs is about the important and urgent issue of antibiotic resistance, an existential threat to humankind. It's not a blockbuster exhibition, it's quite modest in size, and you might say the topic is rather worthy. But reach and messaging were the absolutely key things for us. The exhibition aimed to explain the issues around antibiotic resistance, to demonstrate how individual choices and behaviours can make a difference, and to illustrate the global scientific effort to combat the problem. So it was up at the Science Museum in 2017-18, and then shared via an innovative model that we call the Blueprint Pack. None of the structure or artifacts travel, just the intellectual property, the research, plans, designs, events ideas, and so on. And the exhibition is remade by each venue, adapting it to suit the local context. So it's much, much cheaper to hire than a conventional exhibition, and only data need travel, so it's highly sustainable. Our Blueprint exhibitions, which focus on contemporary science issues and don't contain museum objects, that's key, are available to any institution that wants to host them and create their own version. And this is how it went to Argentina, Mexico, Russia, and South Korea. I've picked out, though, India and China, because in this case, the Science Museum successfully bid for funding from Wellcome Trust to take the exhibition and an associated schools and families programme to 4 venues in each of those countries. Countries where inappropriate antibiotic use is extremely high, so the message would have maximum impact. And that's where most of the more than 1.5 million visits came from. There's a few pictures to show how different the exhibition could look in different places. Adaptation is positively encouraged as host venues know their context and their audiences. Some venues retained the white, rather clinical vibe of the London show, whereas others opted for something very different, including some fantastical artworks and interactive elements. So what did the Science Museum Group get out of this project? Well, it delivered against most of our objectives in international working. We took our mission to inspire futures beyond our walls and raised awareness about a crucial issue and hopefully stimulated positive attitudes and behaviours. We acquired a terrific set of partners with whom we've sustained fruitful relationships. We learned a good deal ourselves about the cultures and audiences of different countries, lessons that feed into our own content and practice. And in terms of soft power, the project succeeded at different levels. The book cover there is the book that started the whole thing, really. Professor Sally Davis is an absolute evangelist about antimicrobial resistance, and at the time was the government's chief medical advisor, so very influential. Top right, the slide is the opening event in Buenos Aires, attended by the British ambassador alongside the Argentinian science secretary. And bottom right, in Moscow, note the healthcare is great banner. This is part of the UK's national marketing campaign. And by helping to promote the UK as a field leader and also as a collaborative and open partner, we enhanced our own institutional soft power, you might say. That's our reputation and influence with the UK government and other domestic stakeholders. Income for us came from the Wellcome Grant itself, which was very significant, plus other funding from the British Council, from our Foreign Ministry, and from corporate funders. And the best thing is that the Superbugs legacy continues. Beyond the initial exhibition, we've continued to work with practically all of the partners in different ways and to different degrees. Most significantly, we secured a second major Wellcome Grant to work with the same core partners in India and China on a similar project in vaccines. Similar, but bigger and better. Hunt for the Vaccine, which is now called Injecting Hope, but I've mentioned both names because they both come up, will go to more venues in all 3 countries, and the centrepiece exhibition is being co-developed from the start rather than adapting a science museum product. It will launch in London, Delhi and Guangzhou in November this year, and will also be shared more widely as a blueprint pack. We're really excited to see what people will do with it and looking forward to building on the success of Superbugs. So that's a good place to stop for now, I think. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Helen, for this really interesting introduction of the Superbugs and your projections for the Hunt for the Vaccine new exhibition that you are planning. So before I demonstrate our mapping results and then the new layer of the data to power prototype, I wanted to provide some more information on the framework. So the mapping framework includes several aggregated data sets and indices, including urban context data, museum context data, exhibition engagement metric, and urban online engagement. First of all, let's look at urban context data that is represented through 2 aggregated indices, including global exposure and cultural infrastructure. And the global exposure metrics aggregate such data as urban population, migration rates, tourist arrivals, annual number of incoming foreign students, and passengers flights per day. So all this data were collected manually by project coordinator Toya Horman. So thank you, Toya, for doing that job, who needed to explore each of the city available urban census statistics for each of the city. It is quite disappointing that despite our aspirations to employ automatic aggregation of data via API interfaces that actually were available for our mapping on the country level data, the collection of urban level data is still not possible. And we identify only a few data repositories that you can see on the screen that collect very limited urban data for some major cities around the world. And some of these platforms have also specific regional limitations in terms of their geographic coverage. And all of them, in fact, only focus on the total population and in some cases, immigration data. And this situation sets some limitation for the mapping at the moment, as we must acknowledge the inconsistencies in data due to various sources and different methodologies used to collect them by different stakeholders. So addressing this existing limitation, it is important to stress that interface data input system that we are designing through the prototype allows us to properly record data provenance information and make necessary notes to keep the mapping methodology transparent and useful. And furthermore, with the rise of smart cities and further unfolding of the open data movement, we believe that it will be possible to automatically aggregate urban data from smart cities open data repositories, adding the aggregating mapping all cities that are useful exhibitions for mapping. So considering the content focus and nature of the Superbugs exhibitions, the cultural infrastructure mapping data for the prototype contains also new variables. And beyond mapping local cultural institutions and heritage activities, which usually very positively, influence the local audience cultural participation, we also explore local urban references to the medical content of the exhibition of antibiotic resistance in terms of the development of science and medical infrastructure. And that is why we explored the urban context from the perspective of urban higher education, science and health infrastructure development. Our logic here that the more a city population is exposed to related medical and science topics of antibiotic resistance, either through their educational activities or professional engagement, the stronger their expected response would be from the local audiences. At the same, this data that we collected on each of the city can really highlight those urban locations where it would be the most critical to send the exhibition to start build awareness about this topic. If all these infrastructures are not developed yet, then people might not be aware of the topic, and that may be critical for the soft power purposes to send these exhibitions to these particular areas. Similarly to Wonderland mapping, we also quantified cultural objects, stories, and persona featured through the exhibition, coming from each urban context, and especially considering that the exhibition itself only provided a blueprint, like Helen said, blueprint from Science Museum in London, and all objects were collected from their local country context. It was important to explore how each of the city was represented in this traveling exhibition in terms of their amount of objects submitted to be featured in the exhibition. We also added new variables on the level of exhibition engagement metrics that now contains not only on-site visitation data to the physical museum premises, but also reveals its digital responses through social media accounts. And data related to digital engagement of exhibition on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram were collected again manually by calculating the total amount of responses given by audiences to the local science centers posts on the exhibition, including different comments, likes, and reposts and things like that. And of course, it would be great to add to this their website, digital engagement, and Google Analytics on the exhibition itself. But unfortunately, in this iteration of data collected, this data was not possible to obtain from participating museums. Finally, we also added more nuanced urban online engagement aggregated index to add to the exhibition impact mapping. And so far it is based on two variables. First, it's a Google Analytics collected from the urban population connecting to the Science Museum group in London through their website. And while we also collected this data for Acme Wonderland mapping, we collected this data only on the national level. In this time around, we were able to, really zoom in and collect urban data, which was really great. So, also we collected data on Google Trends. So Google Trends data revealed the exhibition topic popularity among local urban audiences by looking at their title exhibition keywords appearance in local urban Google searches for the time period of the exhibition touring in this particular country. So this data was instrumental to expose that some areas in India have a much higher population's engagement with the topic of Superbugs Superbugs, where the exhibition didn't actually travel, and it potentially points at missed opportunities for a targeted audiences engagement. As we can see on the picture here, after Delhi, that tops the list of Google searches, we have Kerala and Telangana provinces, where people seem also be very interested in the topic. And this area, though, were not covered through the exhibition touring so far. While in this iteration of data collection, we manually obtained all the data from Google Trends, in the future, it would be really useful to automatically aggregate data using Google API and expand the search from one key search term to the semantic field of the exhibition to make the analysis of the exhibition relevance and potential interest to local urban audiences more accurate. So among Argentina and India, so now back to our mapping, to the actual results of the mapping of the Superbugs. So among Argentina and India, we mapped it only in 2 countries so far. We also attempted to do it in China, but unfortunately, data were not available for us in the country. So among Argentina and India, mapping of the Superbugs exhibition revealed that Buenos Aires generated the highest local engagement power. And in comparison to top receiving hosting city in India, such as Mumbai, with index reaching 86, Buenos Aires indeed outperforms Mumbai in terms of urban global exposure, cultural infrastructure, and museum context. However, if we compare 2 exhibition actual results, we can see that in Mumbai, exhibition generated larger audiences on site, as well as stronger public engagement on social media. We can also spot a much higher local audience visitation of the Science Museum in London website, and the popularity of Google search of the topic related to Superbugs. So using a linear regression model, we also preliminarily calculated the potential engagement power of the new traveling exhibition of the Science Museum Group, which is called Hunt for the Vaccine, and it also has another title that Helen mentioned. Which actually will be, launched very, very soon in November this year. However, it is important to acknowledge that the bias in these predictions is pretty high, since it's based on very small data set available for the Superbug exhibitions, only for 5 cities and 5 hosting spaces and 5 hosting locations. And also 2 of the cities hosted the exhibition during the midst of the pandemic crisis, and the actual visitation numbers were affected by the hosting space closures and protections measures and regulations. So we couldn't really rely on such a small set of data, because with ACME, we had at least 16 different, data sets to work with. In this case, we had actual 3 of those, because we could not work with 2 that were affected badly with the pandemic situation. So let me now show you the demo that we developed and walk you through all the levels. So for the Science Museum Group, per their request that was expressed in our last research seminar, we mapped their collection reach power and online engagement power, and finally their traveling exhibition. So collection reach power, and I will compare here India and Argentina, because I also wanted to highlight the differences between those 2 countries. So we can see from the map that collection reach power is much higher in India because of many factors, including the collection diversity and digital diversity and all this kind of things, even though the digital mobility of the population of Argentina much higher than in India. Still, there are a lot of more connections developed between the UK and India in terms of their collections. And we move on to the next layer that was presented during our webinar. And again, we see here that a lot more audience engagement have already been developed with India rather than Argentina. So we see much higher indexes for social media engagement and online visitation, which is really, really high, 74, and digital mobility. Yeah, digital mobility, actually, again, like I said, it's Argentina outperforms India, but their potential audience scope in India is of course higher. So also what we did is that per the request of some experts, we did a two-dimensional map, which helps to to explore different data quickly if one needs one kind of big snapshot on what's going on in terms of the data. So it looks like here. And finally, I will show you the mapping of, first of all, the Superbugs exhibition. So again, we can explore each city mapping in terms of the data, all this data that I presented to you in my framework. And also what we did here is for the sake of comparison, we can now pin each informational window so another one appears right next to it, so the data comparison become more convenient. So here I have opened all cities that we mapped for Superbugs, from New Delhi to Bangalore and Buenos Aires, also from Argentina. And I listed them in the order of the highest engagement power index to the very lowest. And it starts with Buenos Aires, New Delhi, Mumbai, Kolkata, Bangalore. And so, and here also for the sake of saving time, I opened all their predictions that we did for 5 cities in 5 cities in India, because it also goes to Nagpur, but it actually, according to our prediction, the engagement power will be the lowest there. And again, Buenos Aires stands out basically because of its urban global exposure, cultural infrastructure, museum context. It's much more developed than in other cities in India. But again, we can see that the actual number that we mapped, they were much lower in Argentina. So let me now go back to my slides. And now I would like to invite to the floor Guadalupe Díaz Costanzo, Director of Museums, Exhibitions and Fairs of the Ministry of Science, Technology and Innovation of Argentina, who also runs the Cultural Center of Science since 2017. This center actually was the first one in the world who hosted Superbugs exhibition back in 2019. And she will share her insights and thoughts on the mapping of the Superbugs and maybe expose some interesting, details and stories to add to our mapping analysis. So Guadalupe, you're very welcome.
Thank you very much, Natalia, and good morning or good night here, everybody. I will share a brief presentation. Okay, the Cultural Center for Science started the year 2019 with the interactive exhibition Superbugs, a challenge for human health. It was based on the Superbugs exhibition at the Science Museum in London, as Helen was saying. The exhibition was organized by the Cultural Center for Science of the National Ministry of Science and Technology in Argentina, the Science Museum, the British Embassy in Argentina, and Pfizer Laboratories in Argentina. Superbugs also had the scientific advice of the Antimicrobial Service of the Melbourne Institute, which is a research institution that is a national reference on the topic in Argentina. Those are some general numbers of the Cultural Center for Science in Argentina. And this is Superbugs. Despite we had a very limited time frame, I can remember clearly some of our guidelines. We wanted to address a global issue reflecting our cultural context and without losing the local views of the experts and the experiences related to the topics that we already had. The adaptation work, in a way, we could say, included three big tasks. First, the design of the local version of the exhibits. We had the contents, as Helen was saying before, but we didn't have any physical materials, so the design was a must. Then second, we developed new installations. The laboratory, for example, was an introductory space that we developed in order to experience with the, let's say, good bacteria. And it was a place to discuss also about the resistant ones. Also, the local version of Superbugs included a new installation about Superbugs office. That was the name, how we call it, and it was a new installation where visitors could test their knowledge at the end, in a way, of the exhibition, and they could test it in a playful way. Third, we also developed some visual art installations. We invited artists to develop installations which were inspired by the topic. For example, an artist that has a lot of expertise working with fabrics, she developed a soft area, not exclusively for kids, but at the end it was more for children to play with good bacteria. And another artist, for example, developed an installation that would react when visitors get near. So these are only some examples. The visit in itself could be done individually, being able to ask the mediators at any time, but also through a self-guided visit brochure that we developed. The self-guided brochure was delivered to family groups, especially the family groups that were willing to tour the exhibition and dive into the contents. So once the tour was over, they were invited to seal at the back, like here, to seal some boxes in the brochure if they thought they had learned or discovered things that they didn't know before. Things such as bacterial resistance, the penicillin, or the rapid detection kits, or antibiotics, etc. So we developed different evaluation tools and visitor studies. We did satisfaction surveys, self-administrated quizzes to test knowledge, exploration and observation routes. We also analyzed the visitors' book comments, and we also did several informal observations. The contents of the Superbugs exhibition are an example of new information. For example, 80% of the visitors claim to have found new information, according to our surveys. In the introductory laboratory, many interesting questions arised, and that was very powerful. Questions such as, why do Superbugs exist, or how do Superbugs arise, or have there always been Superbugs? Also, with qualitative observation, we discovered that the great majority of mothers and grandmothers especially were acting in a way as guides to their children and grandchildren, explaining about the importance of hand washing or taking care with the use of antibiotics. So closing this short presentation, for me, in a way, was important to do it with the voices of our visitors. These are some of their messages that we analyzed. And I hope this brief presentation has been useful to open up the discussion afterwards. Thank you very much, Natalia, for the invitation, and Helen for trust the work, which was very important for us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Guadalupe, for this interesting insights, how the exhibition actually unfolded in your museum and in your, city context. I especially loved all the artworks created around the Superbugs topic. This is really amazing. Thank you for sharing that. So I would like now to invite Samarendra Kumar, Director of the National Council of Science Museums in India, who oversaw the Superbugs touring exhibition in India, is now developing a new exhibition, Hunt for the Vaccine, to travel to 5 cities in the country. He will share his own observations and projections in terms of where the exhibitions one of the exhibition made an impact and where the other one would make an impact in the future. So Samarendra, please, the floor is yours right now. You're very welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Natalia, and good afternoon from India to all the panelists here. I would like to just share my slide, if you allow me. Yeah, so actually, just the Superbugs exhibition was done in collaboration with the Science Museum London and supported by Wellcome Group, and also in India, where we had this Indian Council of Medical Research, because it was very contemporary topic and also related to the medical science. So we had the top body of the India, which also gave support for this exhibition. But before that, let me just introduce my institution, which is called National Council of Science Museum, which is one of the largest network of science museum centers in the world. Right now, if you see the map of the world, India, it almost covers several parts of India. And right now we have 47 which are now working science centers, and many more are in making now. It will go to 63 or 64 as such. So it is one of the largest network of science centers in India. Under NCSM, we have around now 25 science centers, because one center was just opened in May 2022. So this is one thing, and just to give a glimpse of that, we not only develop exhibitions in India, but we also develop outside India. And in Australia also, we have the supply exhibits in the Queensland Museum, Canberra also. We provide catalytic support to many of the institutions, governments, ministries. We have developed innovation hubs, which we promote the culture of innovation amongst the young children. So 41 such innovation hubs have been made in different parts of the country. Annual visitor footfall is more than 14.5 million, because it goes on varying from throughout India. Only in NCSM, we are not considering that more than 20 are outside the NCSM, which also covers more than 10 to 10.5 million people. We have one of the largest mobile science outreach program, which is called the Mobile Science Exhibition Program. And right now we are operating 48 such buses in India. And we conduct a lot of major outreach activities program to engage unreached audiences, especially having that inclusive approach. So these are some of the inclusive approach programs which we do, and these are outside the museums what we organize. Especially such, if we see that the people from the rural background, people as a senior citizen, either on the beach or the underprivileged or the urban and rural divide, we try to cater to several sections of the society and to insist some units. And this is one of the major outreach program, which is that 48 mobile science exhibitions all over India. Reach is more than 3.5 to 4 million people. It is covered now more than 57 years of this year. It will be 57th year of this program. So it is one of the largest and longest running program of India, reaching to the remotest part of the country. We have also the international footprints. We developed several exhibitions, especially one of the exhibition was India, a Culture of Science, which traveled to USA, USSR, and several other countries, around 13 countries all over the world. And in fact, several exhibitions like Digital India, Story of Indian Cinema, Cricket Connects, and many other things which travel to Indonesia and Southeast Asia, and also Australia and South Africa. Now we come to the Superbugs exhibition that this was in 4 major cities. I not go about that because it was talking about the antimicrobial resistance, and especially the antibacterial resistance happening in the body and across the globe, and the personal stories what were there in India. So it in the 4 major cities it was there, and unfortunately when it was covering the third leg of that in Bengaluru, we had this COVID pandemic where all the museum centers were closed. So, and when it opened, then we had this program we shifted the inauguration to a very large extent. And then though we had the restrictions in the movement, but we received some visitors. Then the last phase was Science City. Still, it was under some of the lockdown conditions, but still we got a lot of audiences to these exhibitions. The exhibition got a very tremendous response from the government also, because the Union Health Minister inaugurated this exhibition along with the Minister of Culture, and it was a great hit at Delhi. And we organized a lot of interesting programs, because we thought that the exhibition is one of the things, but unless we engage audiences all across the city, we cannot bring people together. So we organized a number of programs, which is there, maybe science lectures, hand-on sessions, panel discussions, maybe street plays, outdoor public campaign, and puppet shows kind of thing. So it brought a lot of audiences which were not able to come to the Science Center. And we reached to a very remotest part of the city also. These were organized at all the 4 locations. So you can see the responses which are there. It was really fascinating to see people interacting with the people, either with physically talented people or great audiences from the school and other sections of society. We had this, for example, in Bengaluru, we had this program that we had to maintain the social distancing, and we had to do a lot of online programs for that exhibition. In Calcutta, we organized a lot of interactive features like that. You can click a selfie with the in your exhibition. We have some interesting items to be given to the audiences like that. And we conducted a lot of things. We took it to outside also. So maybe a puppet show in Science City or a mobile van campaign in Calcutta. Because people were, because the COVID situations are like that, people were not able to come to the museum or the science center. So we devised this mechanism to bring people to the science museums. There was a lot of entertainment for the people, and they can post their picture taken on during the exhibition in their social media posts. So it was tagged in. We had this marketing and PR of the exhibition, which was synced with the exhibition, because a lot of features were there, because it was appearing during the period of the exhibition, and especially during the COVID lockdown, because we wanted to continue this engagement throughout the period. So there are several such kind of social media posts which are there. If you see the features which are there, we had a lot of engagements in March, May, when the pandemic was there. And then after that, in January, February 2021, the number of engagements increased tremendously for that purpose. And in the traditional media also, it was covered in several regional languages, because we found that it is very interesting to do something on the regional language. If you consider the Delhi, just like for sake purpose, that this was a visitor age profile, mostly we took that 10 to 17 years, but a lot of people from 18 to 25 and 25 to 60 also visited this exhibition. In general, we took that simple voluntary feedback chaos, and we asked them to give the rating with other exhibitions all around. And they gave this as the rating as a 5, a very high rating to this exhibition. And the simple learning also, which was increased significantly after the pre and post visit of the exhibition. Quickly, if I see some reflection of this exhibition, we find that if we add this local content in the exhibition, because what we got the blueprint pack from the SMG London, we discussed with them, and then we thought that whether we'll include a lot of interesting personal stories, which will connect the audiences in the India. And that's why we did that. The Superbugs India exhibition had a number of personal stories from all the 4 locations, because we had doctors from south, the patient from east, and maybe the researchers from the west, and some other people from the east also. So several people were connected with this exhibition, and the people featured, they interacted with the local audiences at various events. So that was also very interesting. When people see that they are featured in the exhibition, they found that, okay, when the contents are being discussed, it is being found to be truthful. And audiences have liking for digital interactives with exhibitions, and also the artwork which we installed. And I think the social marketing needs to be done to reach wider audiences, which we learned from this exhibition, especially the pandemic situation which was there. And the foremost, which found that the institution level partnership is important, because what we do that in India and the Science Museum Group, the National Council of Science Museum, we have a very strong partnership, and and that resulted into the next exhibition, which is we are going to open up in 5 major cities. And considering that what we got some reflections, we are introducing this time a mobile science exhibition bus with this exhibition, which will travel in this, when the exhibitions are traveling in the 5 locations, they will travel to the nearby cities of that location, so that we can cover at least about, we plan to reach about 10 million people through this exhibition, both inside the museum and outside the museum also. So this is, I think, and for that purpose, the institutional level partners is very important, that we should have that. And India is ready, because India, the number of museums and number of digital interactives in museums is increasing day by day. We can see a lot of museums which our the top leadership is also considering that. And there is a lot of talk about reimagining museums in India. So you get a variety of museums in India, and I think Science Museums, National Council of Science Museum has made a mark into that particular space as a cultural space promoting culture of science in India. So that was all about. Thank you very much for this question, and I hope I'm able to explain the exhibition in India. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Samarendra. That was a really interesting presentation. I love this concept of connected museum through a specific network that allows you to outreach to your trusted partners. And the concept also of mobile museums, bringing the exhibition to our audiences that have no physical access to your museums, is really amazing. And I think it explains a lot why you have so much higher numbers of visitation for this exhibition, even during the pandemic, in comparison to Argentina, which in fact, the museum in Argentina, it has very, very large visitation, several times higher than your museums, but you were able to outperform in bringing in all these audiences from beyond the physical museum spaces. That was really great. Thank you for sharing these insights with us. So, and right now, I would like to move to our final panel, the discussion forum, to explore what other variables that we could actually map to the mapping, exercise beyond the data-intensive approaches. So we have several participants on the discussion forum, and I would like to invite now Corneliu Bjola to the floor, who will facilitate the whole panel. And Corneliu, please, you're very welcome to take over from here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Natalia. A very interesting conversation we had this morning, today, let's say. Moving on to the last panel for today. So we had the occasion to listen to the input coming from museums, also from the way in which Natalia has refined her model. In a very interesting and very careful way, which I think it's going to have a good impact for the project as an outcome. But now we like to hear also from those who actually organize exhibitions. And we have an excellent group of external experts who would like to invite to share with us the way in which they take decisions about how, in terms of touring, hosting exhibitions. We'll start the discussion with Corrado Canonici, who is the CEO and founder of the World Touring Exhibition. This is an institution that he founded back in 2001. Since then, it has developed, the traveling exhibition has become the core business of, initially started as more as a music and show agency, and since then it has become a traveling exhibition. It has offices in London as well as in Rotterdam. So Corrado, please take the floor. Tell us, if you can, how exactly you take this decision about organizing exhibitions. To what extent, what kind of tools or approaches are you using to measure or to capture their effectiveness, their impact?
Well, good morning, evening, good night, whatever. Really, we've got the whole world here, and yes, you've done a very nice introduction. So you sorted me out for that. And how we work is in a way, in a different way, because we have several thousands of clients worldwide, but we are a business-to-business organization. So our exhibitions are usually hired by local promoters or venues or museums, and that's usually then to market our productions to the local audience. So there is a lot of predicting and predicting input and output locally done. Of course, we have research about where we're going, the cultural target, which exhibitions have been there before, and so on. But we had also quite a lot of surprises in this sense. We have been to venues or cities or countries where we did not expect really we would have done well by our predictions, but actually it happened that we did very well. So sometimes there are surprises, and because of how actually we work, we are sometimes open to surprises. We have to be open to surprises. And the point is actually exhibitions have changed a lot today, because nobody wants to see an event where you just watch and read the descriptions and go home. So
Corrado, sorry to interrupt. Can you say something more about surprises? What do you mean, by surprises here? How exactly?
Surprise. For instance, we knew that a 3D exhibition has been in Israel just a year and a half before, and Israel is a small country. And we have been invited by a promoter to go to Haifa with our 3D exhibition. We start by market research. That was too short time ago, and it was very nearby. I think it might not work, but of course, if you think you're trying, it was a very good promoter, very strong marketing tools. And what happens? We have sold 28,000 tickets in 1 month, which is almost 1,000 tickets a day. We were quite surprised by that. Haifa is not a huge city, but they were very good in promoting to the whole country. For instance, another surprise was actually our Lego exhibition when we have been to Cyprus. It was first time a large-scale exhibition made of professional Lego artists went to Cyprus. For some very funny reason, did not sell very well. On the contrary, when we went to Rome, where we expected to do very well, we did extremely well, selling 90,000 tickets with a lot of buzz at the same time. Another Lego exhibition, which was in Rome, unwisely at the same time we were there, one of our strongest competitors actually, they sold very, very little, because marketing is also an extremely important part of that, because of course we can do a lot of predicting, and we should. And the models that Natalia showed are so interesting, actually. But sometimes our predictions just go out the window, especially in a post-COVID time, when predictions are just completely out the window. We found ourselves, for instance, to go to very, very different ways of understanding what a target is. For instance, one of the things that you have to do now, and which we did during COVID, when we had a few exhibitions, fortunately touring, and what you had to find out is infection rates, vaccine passports or green passes, and all this kind of stuff. In this sense, I don't want to go too much out of subject, but I think it's very important. I actually wrote an article, easy to find. You just have to write vaccine passports, a discrimination, under my name. It went into LinkedIn. It was written in LinkedIn. We should really, really do something as cultural operators about that, because we are just acquiescent a bit too much, probably, all of us, me too, to this liberty side laws. I mean, we know by now there are dozens of peer-reviewed studies saying that green passes, vaccine passports are useless. So maybe this is creating a problem to our business and is actually doing something to our freedoms and liberties. So perhaps we should do something for that. But that is just a bracket. So I don't want to be the next prime minister. So I stop here. Yeah?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for
that.
And the lovely insight about the surprises. Why do they work? Sometimes in a good sense, and then sometimes the expectations actually are not met. And I take from your conversation that there's something about being careful about the competition. Whether there are similar programs, similar activities organized, convened in the city, but also about the role of local promoters and local involvement, which sometimes, because of their skills and also local knowledge, could actually outperform your expectations.
Well, you know what? The point is that we are an independent business. Basically, what we produce is created and financed by us only. We take all the risks. So we cannot just create a beautiful exhibition and bring you wherever, but we also have to do one which people will visit in good numbers. So business sensibilities for us is very important. So we have to do a lot of research, but we also have to create the right exhibition. Trust me, right exhibition is not Britain's or India or Italy's Got Talent, I promise you that. The cultural content must absolutely match the entertainment part of it, and we come probably from the right point for that, because having been through culture first, entertainment, and then a mix of the two, as they call it, edutainment, awful term, I think, and we are probably in the best position to understand, in a good position, from the best, good position to understand how to entertain an audience while at the same time providing a cultural experience without giving them really something populist, popular cultural experience. That's what we are trying to aim for. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much, Corrado. So you said entertainment, that's a new term? Entertainment.
No, don't tell me that. Edutainment, I think it is horrendous, but it's used a lot. So yes, edutainment is.
I'll write it down. I'll keep that in mind.
Thank you.
So, thank you very much, Corrado. Moving on to Dana Andrew. She's a Turing independent museum consultant and trainer specializing in temporary Turing exhibitions, international projects. She's based in Dublin, Ireland, and it's also a part-time executive of ICOM UK, International Councils of Museum UK. She's the co-author and co-editor of Principles and Guidelines for Lending and Borrowing in 2021, and so also the author of the International Turing chapter of the Tag Manual of Turing Exhibition, which was published in 2017. So Dana, please join us and share your experience with organizing tours. What works, what doesn't?
Thank you, Corneliu. So I've just got some slides. Let me. Yeah. Great. So my name's Dana Andrew, and my pronouns are she, her. And in this really short presentation, I'm going to give an overview of the traditional, transactional, and very analog approach to venue finding for international touring exhibitions. I'll pose some questions about how AI and machine learning or data-driven approaches could facilitate and aid the partner and venue finding process. A traditional approach to touring exhibitions has really been for an organisation to produce an exhibition and then find venues for it. It's a transactional approach rather than a partnership approach. And while there is room for both approaches, post-pandemic, I think we're really starting to see a trend towards partnership approaches to touring exhibitions. Receiving venues want to tailor exhibitions to ensure they're relevant to and meet the needs of the audiences they serve. Organisations want to build their networks and develop long-term partnerships rather than a string of one-off projects, which are really resource and time intensive. And a partnership approach might be the only way to realise ambitious touring exhibition projects, as more organisations find themselves pressed in terms of staff, resources and funding. So in the traditional approach to international touring, what I'll call venue finding today is a labour-intensive process and often relies on personal networks. I remember when I worked for a large national museum many years ago, our very analogue process of venue finding went something like this. So make sure we had all the basic information about the exhibition, the subject, the theme, types of objects, display requirements, security requirements, etc., etc. Then we thought about which museums or galleries we already knew who might be interested in the exhibition and have a suitable venue. Which parts of the world might this exhibition most appeal to, and which could it definitely not travel to because of the subject matter or the content. We'd go through the tour venues for previous touring exhibitions of a similar size and theme, and that meant manually going to look up paper files. We didn't have a CRM system at the time. We'd then make a list of potential venues in Word or Excel, and then we'd do some internet research to try and find venues that we didn't know about and look at where similar types of exhibitions had been shown. We'd update the venue finding list again, and then we might review it with colleagues and agree on a strategy on who to approach, in which order, and who would send the communication. And that really relied on personal contacts across the whole museum. We hoped that people would then respond with a yes, a no, or a maybe. And if they didn't respond, we'd keep following up. We'd then continue manually updating the list, noting which venues had said no, which had said yes, which were hot or warm leads to continue following up with, and crossing off any who didn't respond or declined. We'd keep reviewing the list and the strategy with colleagues, and we'd keep going with the approaches until the required number of venues for a tour for the tour was confirmed. So it was really time-intensive work that relied on extensive personal networks and knowledge, and individual staff knowing how the touring exhibition sector worked in each region of the world, and also the working culture in individual countries, so that the approach could be made in the most strategic way by the right person. And this wasn't tangible knowledge that was easily captured or passed on. It was an approach that was quite intuitive and also quite nuanced. It also meant that when staff left the organisation, they took this knowledge and their networks with them. And their knowledge wasn't captured by the organisation in a way that would make it accessible and useful for future staff. It wasn't in a very efficient way of working, especially when staff time and budgets continued to be squeezed. And so this is why I was interested in joining the panel today. Even when I was deeply engaged in that analog process all those years ago, and it was a process that I really enjoyed, I felt there had to be a more efficient way. At that time, something even as simple as a CRM would have helped. And technology might eventually do me out of a job as a freelancer. One type of work I'm often asked to help clients with is venue finding. And that's either to help them develop a strategy or to draw up a list of potential venues for their exhibition based on my personal knowledge, experience, and networks. And this is still time-intensive research work, even after working in the sector for more than 20 years. And in some ways, I actually wish there was some technology that could make this process easier and quicker for both me and my clients. And I'm interested in the potential of technology to support the process. How could aggregated data be used to come up with lists of potential venues based on certain criteria? Is it possible that AI or machine learning could learn this analog process and make it digital, capturing important knowledge and data so that it's not lost, making the process more efficient? And I'm not talking about technology replacing the personal and professional face-to-face partnerships and networks that are so important and so key to successful partnerships and collaborations. I'm interested in the technology as a tool that could support great work that's already happening and also create new opportunities for mutually beneficial partnerships and collaborations. I'm particularly interested in how technology could help organisations who are new to international touring and those who are seeking to build meaningful, mutually beneficial, long-term partnerships through touring exhibitions. Could it provide a useful starting point, providing a list of potentially suitable partners or venues based on common interests and values, and the potential to exchange or bring together complementary exhibition content, knowledge, and experience? I'm sure things will continue to change, and I'm hopeful that post-pandemic we'll start to see more innovative and new ways of working as we move away from this transactional approach and towards a more partnership approach. So I'm going to keep it short and leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Dana. Just to follow up a little bit on your analog approach, analog method. So we heard this morning discussion about the Superbugs exhibition organized by the Science Museum in London, and also traveled nicely to.
I'm really sorry. I can't hear you very well. I'm not sure if it's my connection or yours. Apologies.
I think Corneliu is trying to ask you, what would be your approach if you are challenged to develop a touring exhibition in Ireland for the Superbugs, the exhibition we discussed today? Yeah, using your analog approach and also reflecting on what we have done with the mapping. Yes.
Sadly, the venue I think that would have been perfect for the exhibition closed earlier this year. So just like we heard about a network of science centres across India, we've also there's also the Science Gallery International Network, which used to have a site here in Dublin, but very sadly that site at Trinity College closed earlier this year. So I would need to get my thinking cap back on, but certainly that idea of collaborating with relevant networks that already exist and building partnerships that way, rather than just kind of dropping Superbugs into Ireland somewhere a bit randomly.
Right. So networks and partnerships, something that to keep in mind. I don't know whether Natalia's model, captured that element, but something to think about. Thank you again, Dana. I hope the sound is okay now. So moving on to the third panelist, Michelle Newton. She's the Deputy Director of Artspace in Cadigal country, Sydney. She has commissioned and curated a variety of projects with artists and in partnership with leading international institutions. She recently written and co-edited a series of monographs, she's currently a chair of Samantha Incorporated and on the board of the Visual Arts Art Form Advisory Board of the New South Wales in New South Wales. So Michelle, let me invite you as well to share with us your experience of thinking about hosting exhibitions. Especially in, of course, in Australia, but not only.
Yeah, thank you. I'll just share my screen. Well, that's Artspace in Sydney on Gadigal country. And it's an old photo from 2012. So that building will no longer look like that. We're about to undertake a major redevelopment and reopen our building in 2023. But I thought just to kind of situate it, we're on the harbour foreshore in Sydney. And Artspace is an independent, not-for-profit contemporary art space, and we support the production and presentation of contemporary art. And we achieve this through a number of ways, through our expanded artistic program, and that includes commissioning new work commissions, exhibitions, rent-free artist studios, public programs, publishing, and also advocacy, which we really think is an important part of what we do, and that is really very much advocating for contemporary art practice. And we have a sustained focus on local, regional, national, and international partnerships, which provide the bedrock for the organisation's artistic program and offers a diversified approach in connecting artists and ideas with new audiences, whether that's, again, locally where we're based in Sydney or internationally. And by situating partnerships at the centre of all of our activities, this increases our capacity to present collaborative, civic and creative platforms from Sydney to Asia Pacific and beyond. And we work really closely with Olivia from Museums and Galleries New South Wales, who'll be speaking after me, to deliver much of our regional and national touring across Australia. But I'll speak specifically about our international program. And we focus very much on co-commissioning. Obviously, we're presenting exhibitions, but we really think about supporting an individual artist at a pivotal moment in their career to develop new and ambitious work for a solo exhibition. And this is actually something that makes Artspace quite unique in Australia. No other organisation is really kind of doing this work. And again, it kind of falls back to this idea of advocacy. And over the past 9 years, we've produced 9 new work co-commissions with an Australian artist with over 14 peer institutions nationally. And I'll just check to make sure you can see this image, new image. This is an artist, an Indigenous artist. He identifies as Wiradjuri, Jonathan Jones, at the Palais de Tokyo, and it opened last year, November last year, after 3 years in development, through many lockdowns, etc. And it premiered in Paris last year and received over 85,000 people coming through, even in that kind of strange kind of COVID sort of lockdown periods. And then this is an example of Taloy Havini, who is an artist she's based in Australia, but she also was born in Bougainville, in the autonomous region of Bougainville in the Pacific. And we worked with her. The middle image is at Artspace. The image to the left is at the Seoul Museum of Art in Korea, and the image to my right is at the Dhaka Art Summit in Bangladesh. And her work, that commission, has seen a total of over 500,000 people in the kind of the lifetime of that commission. We commissioned that work in 2020. It went to Dhaka Art Summit shortly after, and just recently in December last year, again through a series of lockdowns, opened at the Seoul Museum of Art. Angelica Masiti, she represented Australia at Venice, at the Venice Biennale over 3 years ago. We worked with her at Artspace. The middle image is with Kunsthal Tbilisi, and the image to the left is at Art Sonje in South Korea as well. And just finally, Helen Johnson, we worked with the ICA in London. And these are just a few examples of the types of institutions or peer institutions that we're working with to co-commission. So I'll just leave it on that image. And for us, we see co-commissioning as an opportunity to kind of extend the life of the work beyond Artspace. And some of our key measures that we really think about is firstly our initial investment, and that's thinking about artist fees and studio production costs and making sure we're covering the cost of labor and materials for artists, through to reaching new audiences, critical reception, and the potential acquisition for collections or potential new presentations for biennales and festivals. And these, really comes down to impact and reach. And these are things that, when I'm hearing other people speaking, are of course important, but these are how we're kind of thinking about it. And obviously by working with with peer institutions, it extends this life of the commission, and it brings remuneration to the artist and all of these potential activities on top of that. And for us, the opportunity to co-commission is often or invariably developed through our curatorial network of international peers, where we invite them to and host them in Australia as part of their research to build a greater context and understanding of the region. And I mean, by region, I mean, Australia, and often it can extend to the Pacific as well. And these networks invariably develop in informal and formal ways, and I think we're still quite strategic in the way we move around them, and they can begin through personal relationships that have formed over many years. They can be developed through peer-to-peer introductions. For Artspace, we host an international visiting curators program, and pre-pandemic it was in partnership with the University of New South Wales, where they provided financial support for this, and that was a key platform for our artistic program. And then of course there's funding through the Australia Council for the Arts, where they had strategic grant rounds where we can invite or apply for funding to support a particular curator to come. And then again through the Department of Foreign Affairs to support cultural and soft diplomacy agendas, with targeted or focused countries that are often aligned with broader kind of geopolitics of the region. And then finally, often again through reciprocal visitor curator delegate programs overseas, people will come. And I think for us, the funding is critical, and I cannot underscore this enough. It's critical to support these peer-to-peer relationships and networks that we've developed over time, so that they can become embedded and intrinsic to everything we do as an organization, and move beyond the personal into institutional and cultural partnerships. That are part of the organization's network. And a key question for us too is how to support this activity, particularly with countries or regions where public funding or philanthropic or corporate support, even infrastructure and resources, aren't comparable to the levels that exist in Australia. And so this is a big question for us, like how can we make these things happen, particularly, the example of Kunsthal Tbilisi and the Dhaka Art Summit don't necessarily have these comparable levels. So we're constantly thinking, how can we build on what we have in terms of resources. And we're also seeing a demise of this strategic funding to support these types of activities. The Australia Council for the Arts no longer has this type of strategic funding to support visiting curators. And so we're needing to look, as an organisation, we're needing to look beyond government support to philanthropics and other types of partnerships. And for Artspace, the co-commissioning is, a really critical part of our program, and we see it as part of building our international reputation, our visibility, and capacity building for the organisation. And it's very much a long-term vision for the organisation, because again, it goes back to advocacy for artists and their practice, and making sure that artists have a life, a long life in terms of their kind of, the expanse of their career. And as I said, it's really important that that becomes embedded within the organisation. And, we need to develop the flexibility for these relationships to survive beyond individual directorships. And I think, for me, I've just got one final point to make, and that's just for us, how, the question I came away from is thinking about peer-to-peer relationships are invariably built on time, trust and rapport, reciprocity, collaboration and knowledge sharing. And so for us, it's really a question on how do we capitalize on these key attributes in terms of, building partnerships. Full stop. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Very, very insightful in terms of learning how you part of struggling with the strategic funding aspect, but also, how much you managed to do despite this challenge. May I just quickly follow up with a quick question? You highlighted the importance of co-commissioning. Can you share with us your criteria for picking this, for deciding what kind of exhibitions to co-commission? What kind of elements do you include in your calculation when you decide whether this project is worth pursuing or that project?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, again, it comes back to the first, and most important element is the invitation to bring a curator to Australia so that they familiarise themselves with the context here and the research and the discourse and what's happening on the ground. And then it's really about artist practices that, feel relevant in both contexts and resonate with audiences. And I think Jonathan Jones is a good example. He is a First Nations artist, and his whole practice is kind of thinking or reframing historical narratives in the context of colonization. And this is a huge conversation that's happening globally around post-colonial or decolonization. And so we invited Daria de Beauvais from the Palais de Tokyo to come to Australia. She'd been through she'd come through a number of invitations, including the Australia Council as part of the Biennale of Sydney. And we're starting to understand that this was really a discourse that was happening, or a conversation that was happening, and was really kind of crucial to everything that's happening here in Australia in terms of not just artistic practice, but our politics, our domestic politics, and how we actually really kind of centre and prioritise First Nations people here in this country. And so she felt like that was a really important discussion to take back to France and really open up there. So it's always kind of a discussion together between curators about what is most resonant and relevant to their audiences, to both audience here in Australia and overseas.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Michelle. That's also something that might be relevant also for Natalia, the way in which she defines her model. So let me move now to our last panelist, Olivia Welch, who is exhibition manager at the Museum of Galleries of New South Wales. She has been developing national tour exhibitions for some time. Also, she's been working on exhibition at the Gulbenkian Museum in Lisbon, Portugal, before, as well as the Space Museum in Sydney, before joining the current position at the Museum of Galleries of New South Wales. So Olivia, in the same direction, how in terms of hosting exhibition, deciding what kind of topics to cover, what can you share with us from your experience or your recent experience?
Hi everybody. I'd like to actually first just start with carrying on Michelle's sentiment and say that I'm currently sitting on Gadigal land in Sydney and would like to pay respects to elders past, present and emerging, and to any First Nations people who are tuning into this presentation in Australia or globally. In terms of the exhibitions that we take on, it really does depend on what the sector needs. We're a service organisation, and if I can just share my screen, I'll give you an idea of the type of organisation we are first. So Museums and Galleries of New South Wales, we help small to medium museums, galleries and Aboriginal cultural centres create exciting experiences for visitors and communities. We run the largest arts and heritage touring program in our state, which is New South Wales, delivering exhibitions to regional, remote and metropolitan audiences Australia-wide. Museums and Galleries of New South Wales provide support and advice on exhibition development and delivery, itineraries, logistics management, insurance, conservation reporting, programming, marketing, promotion, risk assessment, all of those things. And our touring exhibitions come complete with resources, including high quality publications, educational material, professional development opportunities, public programs and activities. Last year, despite COVID limitations, we toured 8 exhibitions to 21 venues across 5 states in the country. So we work closely with a range of organisations and partners to develop innovative exhibitions for national tour, including Michelle at Artspace, and this is one exhibition that she co-curated. And we work with these partners to develop innovative exhibitions that, and we often start talking to these institutions or curators before the initial presentation as to discuss what elements should tour and what elements may need to be adjusted, omitted or substituted or conserved. Each touring exhibition is funded externally through state or federal grants and occasionally through philanthropy. Our itineraries are an important part of this funding, so the venues that we choose, and often we'll have a diversity of institutions that differ in the community, resourcing, and even financial situation. So we base our budgets on creating an equitable experience for the various venues. Once we manage to secure funding, we devise detailed installation manuals, freight schedules, commission education kits and professional development handbooks, and test all the technology. While we are often not able to actually travel on our tours beyond the first venue, our detailed guides and instructions, our online production meetings, and our availability via phone, email, and WhatsApp allow our team to guide installation remotely. If there is an element that does require specific knowledge, we build in a fee to tour, in our funding to tour a technician or a performer or an educator, etc., to travel to these regional and remote areas to be hired, or sometimes we train locally as well. Sometimes these in-person specialists are required at some venues and not others because of the knowledge and capacity of staff, as well as access to really simple things like materials, infrastructure, and in Australia, even Wi-Fi. One of the most important aspects of our tours is capacity building. So in many cases, we actually develop our itineraries and choose our venues with increasing the capacity of our sector in mind. As a service organisation, our focus isn't on numbers through the door, tickets sold or merchandise, but on how exhibitions can provide opportunities for institutions, cultural workers and creatives. Our recent tour Void provides a great example of sector growth and knowledge through touring. So this was hosted by 8 venues across 5 states, and Void brought together contemporary Aboriginal artistic practice from across the country and was curated by Wiradjuri curator, writer and educator Emily McDaniel. To launch the Void tour, Bathurst Regional Art Gallery hosted the Void Education Symposium, which brought together educators from each tour venue to workshop ideas and identify programming opportunities. This symposium led to many of the galleries hosting McDaniel to deliver yarning circles, like you see here, for staff and audiences, along with local Aboriginal artists delivering workshops and off-site excursions. There was also the requirement for Hayley Miller Baker's work to only be handled by First Nations installers. This meant venues were asked to identify a First Nations person, so an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander person, or people either on staff or connected to the gallery to install the work, deinstall the work, and perform any reparations to the installation if required. So this meant that Void facilitated educational opportunities, local employment, and community investment. And feedback in our sort of manual reporting documents from venues after hosting Void was that there is a real need for well-financed opportunities for galleries and museums to engage with local First Nations people on country in ways that extend consultation into participation and leadership. This experience has fed into our development of our upcoming tour, A Current Affair. So for this survey of Aboriginal Artistic Collective Proper Now, we have worked closely with the artists and our partner UQ Art Museum in determining parameters to ensure cultural safety at each venue, and requested letters of support from local First Nations group in support of hosting this exhibition. We also factored in appropriate remuneration to pay for local consultation and staffing to ensure programming and key decisions are actually First Nations led. So I guess from all of this, to wrap up, it is relatively simple to quantify the success of a tour based on visitor numbers and amount of locations, or even immediate audience opinions or feedback. But at Museums and Galleries of New South Wales, we see true success in skills gained, creative communities built, audiences diversified, connections made, and relationships fostered. I guess I want to leave you with a question that I think has been simmering across lots of the presentations today, of how can we better capture these meaningful outcomes and convey their importance? Thank you.
So thanks a lot, Olivia, for this very comprehensive presentation of your work and the exhibitions. I couldn't help notice a word that you used, which I love it. It's a word innovation. Used to be my second favorite. Disruption was number one, but disruption now has gone away. So innovation, I'm back to innovation. So when we speak about innovation in this context, because we organize this exhibition and we put a premium on the idea of innovation. Can you elaborate briefly?
Sure. So I think probably, innovation in the context of maybe a major capital city might be quite different to an innovative idea or project for a community when you go somewhere regional or remote. For those, familiar with Australia, it does have the tyranny of distance, but also, I drove to a public program on the weekend. It took me 2.5 hours. That's not that far. So there are lots of wonderful regional galleries, museums, and Aboriginal cultural centres, this wonderful network across the country that don't necessarily have access to the amount of things that cities do, just based on funding, based on distance, but bringing some of these ideas both ways, so bringing kind of regional concerns to the city, but also bringing some of the resources from the city out to these areas, means that we can push ideas that they may not have had direct access to into space, and then I guess modify those ideas to suit the local context, creating kind of this wonderful flow back and forth that once again, through this diversification turns an idea from being a one-way channel to having, multiple possibilities and facets based on local situations. I think in this context, innovative is less to do with something that's never been thought of before, and more taking ideas and expanding them through audiences that might be very different, or audiences that have different concerns and needs.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Olivia, for the explanation. So just to wrap up, our discussion here, I think we learned quite a lot from the 4 different interventions. So we learned about the importance of the local context, and also what the convergence with what Corrado mentioned, for instance, so edutainment, right, education, but also in an entertainment context. We learned something from Dana about the role of partnerships in finding venues, but also strategies. We learned also from Michelle the importance of commissions and the criteria to a certain extent that we can use to promote the connections, dominant themes of conversation and political issues or social issues that are relevant for the community, but also from Olivia as well, very comprehensively, also the importance of innovating, but innovating by pushing certain ideas that sometimes get overlooked, and exhibitions are exactly this place for producing change. I'm going to stop here and hand it back to Natalia. I'm not sure how I'm going to integrate all of this in refining your model, but I think this is very good feedback, and it left me with a very solid impression of all the workshop that we have done in the past 3 months.
Thank you so much, Corneliu. Indeed, that was a fascinating panel, and thank you for excellently facilitating it. And your summary is pretty comprehensive. And what I see across all the presentations, and I think everybody mentioned and today who presented, is their building relationship is one of the most important component in decision-making process when exhibitions are traveling abroad or when they are invited to be hosted within their museum and specific city. But if you think about that, many new museums are emerging right now, right? Especially in the global South, which do not still have the connections, and we still do not know their context. Then it becomes really interesting how we can expand our networks, where else we could go, where else we could outreach. So, and also this is one aspect, and I think their mapping exercise that I'm doing could be helpful in preliminary supplying museum professionals with some data to make some first decisions in thinking where else to go next and why maybe. So, and another aspect that I also wanted to mention, this relationship building, and something that Dana voiced very clearly is that relationship building also, it's accumulated knowledge within specific people who work for the organizations, right? But what happened when when these people leave these organizations? How we capture the knowledge that they gained through years of their experience, the connections they made. I think this aspect also could be addressed with the technology. And for example, in the case of ACME, we had more time and more space to do deeper research. And we, this global connectivity power layer of the South map, it actually maps the institutional connections of ACME with 180 institutions around the globe in 80 cities. And we developed a framework to measure the strength of this connection with 4 degrees of strength, from mere exchange of objects on this level to very strong partnerships that are sealed with specific agreement. So I think, and right now it's there in the system. And one can go and explore what has been done by ACME, what connections, what cities, what organizations. And one day when maybe Chris is not there anymore and somebody else will join, there will be some knowledge already captured through technology. So I still do believe there is a lot of room to progress in this direction. And I thank you everybody today for really amazing presentations, for very insightful feedback that you provided, for many exciting details that you shared about your institutions and about your exhibition. So thank you very much. That was really helpful. Also, because this is our last event in our research sessions in this project, and the project is coming to an end, I wanted to thank Professor Corneliu Bjola for being a partner in this project and for his help, and also my team, amazing team who helped and who worked a lot behind the scenes to make all these events happen. So thank you, Laura and Toya, for your research and for your network's contribution to the project. Also, I would like to thank our marketing manager who promoted all the events, worked very hard on marketing and the website development, Jasmine Christian. So thank you everybody in the really, really lovely events today, and please keep connected because we developed the whole community of interested professionals. So I would like to keep this network going in the future and thriving. Thank you very much. Thank you, and have a nice day or evening or night. Bye-bye.